The defending national champion set to go to camp later this week. We bring in Ryan Cantor from Shaking the Southland to break down the Clemson Tigers. Ryan, how you doing today?
Great. Thanks for having me.
Definitely. So it's good to be talking some college football, and especially let's start at the top at number one. And of course, the offense loses some multifaceted, dynamic program changing type players into Deshaun Watson, Mike Williams, and some others, Artavis Scott included. But at quarterback, at some other positions, you got some reasons to be concerned, also some reasons to be rather excited, because Clemson has reached that status where the conveyor belt just keeps churning out 5- and 4-star athletes.
Yeah, so coinciding with Clemson's rise as we won an Orange Bowl, won a Fiesta Bowl, got to a national championship. Throughout that, one thing that's really helped in that process is getting better and better offensive line players. And that's something that's been a steady growing process, kind of lagged behind our ability to get great wide receivers, great quarterbacks, players like that. And now we're at the point where we've got a lot of very good offensive linemen who we were excited about, young guys breaking in, being better than their replacement, better than the players they replaced. And now we've got some veterans. He's a fantastic left tackle. He's now a junior. Started as a freshman in 2015, was a major reason Clemson went to a national championship. So he's in year 3, maybe his final year if he goes to the NFL. Taylor Hearn at left guard's really developed. Tyrone Crowder at right guard's a very good run blocker and is supposed to be an improved pass blocker. And Sean Pollard came on last year as a true freshman, and he returns now with some experience and should be very good. At center we have Justin Falcinelli and Gage Cervanka. That's still a position battle. And that's a little bit more of a concern there. So we had Jay Guillermo last year, who was excellent, and losing him, he's one of those guys that when you lose, you don't really fully get what you lose until you see what you had behind him. So a little bit of concern there.
Yeah, definitely. It could be argued that center is the second most important position on the offense. And as you mentioned, Guillermo, not just a talented player, but a guy that got everybody in place and was a stalwart along the offensive line. We've got Justin Falcinelli, Zach Giella as two players that have been noted as vying for that role at the center position. So you've got concerns along the offense. Anywhere else? I know that tight end, running back, anywhere else that you can kind of spotlight who may be on the rise?
Sure. One last point on center. You mentioned Zach Giella. One guy is Gage Cervanka of Greenwood, South Carolina. Small town, but puts out a ton of talent. He was actually recruited as a defensive lineman and is converted to center. We'll see if he's ready to start, but he may actually overtake the players who are recruited for that position if they're not ready. Some other positions, tight end. People don't realize just how good Jordan Leggett became throughout his career. He had a 26-yard catch in the national championship game to set up the Tigers for the winning score on the final drive. He finished that last season with 736 yards and 7 touchdowns. Great tight end. So losing him and trying to replace him is going to be really tough. Tigers don't really have a pass-catching tight end in the cupboard to replace him. Milan Richard, who's listed as the first team right now, has 1 career reception as a tight end. So we'll see how that works out. But that's been a position that Clemson's often relied pretty heavily on. So, Dwayne Allen, Brandon Ford, great tight ends at Clemson over the past handful of years. So we'll see what they do. You also have Cannon Smith and DJ Greenlee, but they're more of a thumper blocker types. And quarterback is the obvious one, right? Quarterback is a big question mark. Deshaun Watson, probably the greatest player in Clemson history, easily the greatest quarterback. He's off to the Houston Texans, his bright career ahead of him, and we're going to have to try to replace him. And no one's going to come in and be Deshaun Watson right away, but we've recruited really well. We have a great running quarterback, Kelly Bryant, who's now a junior, true junior, and he's got the early lead entering fall camp to be the starting quarterback. But he's got a pretty limited history of passing the ball. 18 career passes is just total in his Clemson career. 15 completions is good, but the longest pass he's ever completed is 15 yards. So we'll see if he developed into a passer. We know he's a dynamic runner, so his upside is definitely there. But he's never really been given much of a chance to make any big plays, playing mostly in garbage time. And in the spring game, he broke his pinky, so you didn't get to see anything. Which was unfortunate. Behind him, you have Zarek Cooper. He was a Rivals 4-star. He's now a redshirt freshman. So definitely some upside. He had offers from Virginia Tech, Miami. He's out of Jonesboro, which is a South Atlanta suburb. And you have Hunter Johnson, of course, who's the 5-star from Indiana. He had offers from Michigan, Alabama. So he has huge upside. But playing in Indiana may not have faced the best competition like some of these Florida kids do. So he might not be ready. So it's going to be an interesting battle. That's definitely a scary spot. To mention one other position of strength on the offense while we're on that side of the ball, we lost a lot of great wide receivers. Artavis Scott, you mentioned, obviously Mike Williams, absolute superstar, although he did hurt his back and he might not play for the Chargers this season. But even with that, Clemson has just done an unbelievable job recruiting wide receivers. Still have good talent and pretty good depth returning. Hunter Renfrow, the hero who made the game-winning catch in the national championship game, he's back as the starting slot. Behind him, you have Ray McLeod, who's a 5-star or 4-star, depending where you look at Florida. So you're great in the slot. McLeod and Powell and more of the wide receiver position that's going to be running end-arounds and plays like that. And then you have Deion Kane, who's maybe the best player on the offense, deep threat, great wide receiver, and Trevion Thompson, who's another highly touted recruit who just hasn't got a lot of playing time yet because there's just so much talent there. So the quarterback, maybe green behind the ears, but he's going to have a great offensive line and great wide receivers to help him.
So is the thought process basically that if the quarterback can come in, and especially if it's Kelly Bryant because of his experience in the system, and not make mistakes, that the defense is going to be so good, a top 5 caliber defense in the nation, that if the quarterback can develop and get ready for Florida State, not discounting Auburn, but looking at the ACC and the championship there, then you've got 6 to 8 to 9 weeks sometime in late October to get ready for the one game. Not that you can't lose to anybody else, but that would be the one game that would be considered for the de facto ACC championship game, that the quarterback has that much time to develop.
I think that's a fair assessment. I mean, you obviously have to be careful because last year we would have assumed that the Florida State Clemson game was the ACC Atlantic Championship, and it turned out it was the Louisville game. So you never know. But yeah, I think that's probably a fair assessment. These quarterbacks are going to get better as the season goes on. And if one of them doesn't, they'll probably be replaced by another one who does. And so the timing of the Florida State Clemson game is always so critical. And I think being late in the year benefits Clemson this year. The defense should be outstanding, as you mentioned. And so having a guy who could be a game manager, this could almost be a very Alabama-esque way to think of it, but great defense, decent enough offense to get the job done. Clemson's defense is going to return an incredible starting defensive line. Christian Wilkins moving back to defensive tackle from end where he was forced to move last year when there was injuries. You have Dexter Lawrence, a rising sophomore, who is just an unbelievable freshman, huge guy in the middle. And then a defensive end, you have Cleveland Farrell, who's really come on, had an incredible Fiesta Bowl against Ohio State, and Austin Bryant, who returns from injury. Some concern on that defensive line. That is an awesome starting D-line. But there's been some things that have happened over the offseason that just kind of pulled from its depth. And Clemson likes to cycle the guys through, give them rest, keep them fresh, wear down the offensive line. But it's going to be a little tougher this year. You have Chris Register as a backup. You have Niles Pickney, Albert Huggins. There's some backups, but you've lost some great backups. Carlos Watkins was starter last year, and he's departed. But Scott Pagano would have been probably a backup, but he would have got plenty of snaps as a defensive tackle. And he transferred to Oregon, which was a little odd, but it's a graduate transfer. I suppose he just wanted playing time or really the spotlight of being a starter. So he'll be there. He'll be probably one of their best defensive linemen. So losing him is tough because he would have gotten plenty of snaps, even though he's not a starter. And then we lose 2 defensive ends. One, Richard Yergin. He was going to get a lot of snaps as a backup defensive end. Accident, had an injury similar to what Mike Williams had with his neck. Should be fine long term, but he's not going to play pretty much at all this year. And then with Samuel Davis, he was a defensive end we recruited out of Bamberg a while ago. Was kind of a reach recruit, maybe a guy you get to keep that connection with the high school in Bamberg where a lot of good DNs come out. But he never gained the weight, never was really able to be a D1 ACC Power 5 kind of defensive end. He went ahead and transferred. So not a lot of depth there. So we really unbelievable starting 4, but you can't have an injury.
Ryan, you're doing a nice job, not just as analyst, but as host, because the segue there, as you mentioned, both defensive line depth and you used the term Alabama-esque in relying on the defense and then the running game to support the quarterback game management play. Had a conversation with my Alabama guy, Stephen M. Smith, yesterday, and we were talking about the defensive line there at Alabama. He has the same type concerns. Great front four, the depth of concern in terms of proven players. Sure, they've got the 4 and 5 stars next to the names, but they haven't proven it. And there might be some concerns there because I think that football has changed in 10 or 15 years, and the emphasis has been on the spread formation and the pass attack and playing in space. But the other big change in college football has been reliance 10 to 15 years ago on 4 to 5 guys up front to play every down and be elite players and to get after the quarterback and stuff the run. Now you need a rotation because football coaches have determined that the guy that's that much worse is better when he's completely fresh before in place of the guy that's running on fumes that's just a little bit better of a player. And so the Clemsons of the world and the Alabamas, Ohio States, there's only a few teams around the country that can make this claim that they can run through 7 or 8 guys that are almost as good as each other to play down to the fourth quarter in those game-winning drives that can be shut down. And as you mentioned, Clemson's been able to do that the last couple of years, and it remains to be seen if they're going to have that kind of quality depth along the defensive front this year.
That's right. It's definitely a concern now. Clemson lost some great players on defense with Ben Boulware, Jadar Johnson, Cordray Tankersley, but they don't lose a ton of players overall, and so they should be strong in all 3 units. Secondary linebackers and up front. The depth in the defensive line is just a concern.
As an ACC observer, I would like to see somebody else jump up and challenge Clemson and Florida State, but it has become the de facto championship game in recent years. And once again, it shapes up to be that, as Clemson has been the better team the last couple of years, but Florida State looks very primed to be possibly the better team with an experienced quarterback in play, a known factor, but Clemson with that time to prepare. And certainly we cannot discount the Tigers to reclaim their championship there in the ACC. All right, Ryan Cantor from Shaking the Southland. Please join him there for the best in Clemson football coverage. Right, Ryan, we appreciate the time.
Thank you. Appreciate it.